Good morning, everybody. Um, I'm doing this video because it's not exactly, but 4 weeks till I go to Africa. And I can't wait to go to Africa. So I've been talking to a few friends and, they're asking me a whole bunch of stuff. But in between all these discussions, I had a lot of friends ask me, how come I don't make videos of like Germany and what my life is like here and, what it's like retiring and everything I do. Um, to make a YouTube channel and all that kind of stuff. So I'm thinking about it, and I am probably going to do it, especially regarding the differences. Because people have asked me a lot. I have so many American friends. Obviously, I grew up there and then I worked there, but regardless of that, a lot of them are like 62, 63 years old, just like me. Early retirement in America is still a year ahead of Germany, one plus for America. So a lot of my friends are retiring early at 62 years old. Um, I'm still have to wait till next year um, at 63, but just basically try to compare uh, what is life like here as compared to the United States, because that's a big issue right now. Who's doing better, all these tariffs and just the whole system of what we're going through, and just my personal point of view. And like I said, this is a personal point of view based on my experiences and based on the truth of just of what I've gone through in life, and where is life better. I haven't really prepared for this video, so I'm just winging it right now. But there's obviously a lot of things that come to the top of my head. I don't know where to start though, but I'll start just basically with that life is not bad in America. I did not come to Europe because I was suffering in America. I was not an economic refugee. Coming to Germany, number one. I lived basically the American dream. Let's be honest. There's nothing that was missing in my life. We grew up as Greek immigrants. My parents worked hard, but they were always there at the end of the day. We grilled. We had good neighbors. We got along. Obviously there was some racism. But nothing seriously. In my generation, didn't take it that way. Maybe it's just my age. Everything has to be politically correct nowadays. I remember being called a greasy Greek and calling, the Portuguese friends pork chops and, you Irish mix, and nobody really flipped out. And all of a sudden, we were never going to talk to you again. Um, like I said, it was just part of being life and it never affected me. I'm just being honest. We had our car, we had a middle class life, and my parents were just, workers. I went to college in Greece, which definitely changed my perspective on life a lot when I was there. Um, and, going back to the US, I had a good job. I worked for a good company. I had good friends at the job. I had a great house with, people that know it was like, 3,500 square feet on 6 acres of land with a traditional barn. I didn't have much missing in my life in America. So let me just say that. I did feel not only at home, but privileged, put it that way. Uh, Now, living in Germany, what was that like? Um, I'll be honest with you, it's better. And let me explain why it's better for me. And maybe a lot of you can relate. First of all, if you're, when I first saw my work contract, I remember this. I remember having talks with the company saying, you know what, you have to go to Germany and we'd like you to stay there. And you know what, I obviously get to the point, Adam. I said, let me see a work contract. I saw 6 weeks vacation. Think about that as a value in life. Think about it a little bit. 6 weeks paid vacation. And in Bavaria, where I was, where I first went, we had 11 paid holidays on top of that. So you have 8 weeks in a day. Um, I couldn't believe that. I knew it because I had lived in Europe before, that they were generous. But, when you realize that you can sign something like that, my kids were, 2 years old and 3 years old. They were babies. They were born in America. But, obviously it was easier to move at that point. I thought 8 weeks vacation, Jesus Christ, I'm going to do it. Now, is that necessarily the most important thing in life? Well, it's definitely a really important issue in life, I think, at least. How much is that worth? Think about that financially, too. You're getting paid for this. It's 8 weeks, it's 2 months a year. On top of that, you get every weekend off. So, yet. And I'll add that more than that to why it's better. In Europe, by the way, in Europe, like, I don't know, there's no country I don't know of. Germany's its own microcosm, where obviously it's a much richer nation than most European nations. There are others that are above Germany, but it's definitely in the top, seven, eight. um, but even like in countries like Greece or Austria, no matter where, you're going to get 4 weeks. Some countries have 7 weeks. It's like that you're going to get 6 weeks off a year with holidays in anywhere in Europe is a given. So that's a great value in itself. Um, Second is, again, if you look at the war contract, is healthcare. They pay half, you pay half, and it's you pay as you go. But it's unlimited sick time. Think about how much that's worth. If you break your leg, or if you somehow have cancer, knock on wood, if you have any kind of medical issue, you don't care. I mean, literally. I mean, I made a small video about this in the past where I did my when I turned 60. They did everything. An MRI. They did my blood works. I went to a dermatologist looking for cancer. I went to an ophthalmologist. I mean, I did everything. Because my shoulder hurt. On top of that, and then I got physical therapy, and I didn't pay anything. I know it's hard to imagine, but that's just the way it is. And I'm not going to say everything's perfect. It's not perfect by far, but that's just how the system, with all its imperfections, does work. Um, on top of that, again, just adding to quality of life and stuff like that. Um, just looking at those two factors, it already makes your life a lot easier. Now, another major third factor is crime. Please look at the rate of crime. Do you feel safe at night? Going anywhere? Here, most places you do. And again, I'm not talking about inner city Paris or inner city Frankfurt where there's junkies and that's there. It's naive to think everything is so great here in Europe. There's a lot of bullshit here too. Let me tell you. But on the average, like I said, if you compare like Connecticut to where I am, maybe in Baden-Württemberg, upper middle class neighborhoods and stuff like that, you're still more confronted with crime just because of the amount of guns. Now, I don't want to get into the Second Amendment issue. I'm just giving you the realities of the situation here, okay? Um, the police tend to be much friendlier. You can actually go out to police because they're not paranoid. I mean, I understand the police. Like I said, I grew up in America. They're paranoid. Everybody could have a gun. Some fucking asshole with a gun is now going to make his day. So, again, let's look at that as an issue. You don't have the amount of mass murders and, everyday people getting shot and stuff like that. I know it's hard to believe people, but yeah, it does have an effect on me, like and I don't want to get into a Second Amendment issue. You do have the right to have a gun, and people do have guns here. In case you're wondering, doesn't anybody have a gun? It's a fact. No, people have guns here, but it's really highly registered. Like, I mean, it's put it this way: in the U.S., you got to go get a driver's license, right? They're not going to give you the car. Well, here it's kind of like the same thing for a gun license. I mean, you got to go get a license. You got to go take tests, how to shoot it, you got to know how to clean it, literally, I am not joking, you have to have it locked away. It's just much more difficult, and people are not just as gun crazy, I guess. I can't explain it really. But that overall feeling for me, is amazing, kind of, with my kids being little here, we were going anywhere, you didn't feel that there was, this is just a feeling again, I think a lot of Americans that come abroad will have that same feeling as well. They understand what I mean. Even people that come as tourists, they understand. And let me just add that there's a personal point of view, especially among young men, even in Southern Europe and anywhere you go. In America, we tend to have like a little bit of a yo man macho thing. I don't know why that's there, but you know what I mean. We're almost like even the upper middle class sometimes. Everybody wants to be a gangster. Maybe people are going to get pissed off at me because I said that, but I think a lot of people my generation, nobody wants to be a gentleman. Everybody wants to be a gangster, which I don't understand. This is a mentality here. You don't have that as much in Europe, like that. Yo, this is my bitch. Maybe I'm from a different generation, but here in Europe, that's a no-go. First of all, what woman would go with a guy that's calling her a bitch? Like she's just as fucking stupid. And second, what kind of guy would call his woman a bitch? this kind of an attitude does not exist really here in Europe. Um, thank God. Or not as much, even the macho thing, people will help you, and, it's just a safer thing. So if you just look at those three issues, fourth is going to be, this is going to be a really long video. Another fourth major issue is obviously what I call third spaces. Like, we're so rural and spread out, especially like in areas like, never mind Connecticut, but, in Iowa and all those kinds of areas, but even looking at rural Connecticut, Europeans tend to centralize a lot more, having like, small inner town, the inner city, the inner town, the old villages, they say here, is still alive. The inner cities are still alive, which what I call them third spaces. But it's easier to do that kind of because it's so densely populated, meaning that all these parks with playgrounds, you've seen my videos in Greece, and it's the same way here in Germany. There's a lot of what I call third spaces. These third spaces have outdoor cafes, ice cream parlors. It's a place where people can congregate more often, and there's more than just the mall. So there will be little shops and all that kind of stuff around, and that's very, 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 very common in Europe. I mean, anybody that's come here as a tourist will see that. So therefore, you kind of get more of a society issue, kind of. People understand each other, they talk to each other, they're more open because of these third spaces. I studied political science and sociology. Somebody that you understand what I mean by third common spaces. Communist countries try to create these among these building blocks and stuff like that. We don't have as much of that because nothing's within walking distance, which is part of the fourth and the fifth is overall food and fitness. I realized that as I came along later, but let's just go to that as one major issue. Food is just much more, local market, please look into, the stuff that you can't even sell here in Europe. Like Gatorade and all that kind of, weird stuff that you can't sell because of the amount of sugar and coloring. And look at a ketchup bottle. Please Google this if you don't believe me, look at a ketchup bottle in the United States of what it's made out of, and look at one made in Europe. You'll laugh. Gatorade, zero sugar, and there's no country in Europe with zero. I mean, I think Germany has actually the least amount. It's like 5% or 10%, and Greece has like up to 20% fresh orange juice. But basically, health and life care here is just a lot easier. I don't know about the food prices. I mean, I go back all the time, or I had been back all the time, but I haven't been back in like 6 years since Corona started, and I started traveling around the world. But that's another story. So this is going to be a long video, man. I can't believe I'm making this, but regarding food and stuff, people tend to eat better here. Eating out in America with 20% tips and all that it's really expensive. I remember being there, going to the grocery store, getting fresh vegetables, and I mean fresh, organic stuff like that. It's almost impossible. Let's be honest. Here it's a lot more common. People will actually go shopping at twice, 3 times a week. That's why they have those small refrigerators here. Because they like fresh produce. They like, eating is more than just a function. And here's another issue. It's not based on size. I'm going to tell you, you ask people in America when I was there, it's like, hey, how was the restaurant? Well, man, they had some huge portions. That's not what I asked you. I asked you was it a good restaurant. For us, somehow, big portions automatically qualifies it as good. They're not that way here. They see the American portions and they're flipping out, man. So a lot of the health issues is, based on our food. Let's start there. Let's not blame the government for everything, kind of. It's just what everything is there. Frozen pizzas. It's not that much. Please trust me. Being a Greek, especially if you go to Greece, it's not that way at all. What you buy is very important in the quality of your life. What you eat basically becomes a value product. You might be driving an older car here. Okay, let's compare the U.S. might have a better car or a newer car. But he's not eating as well as a lower middle class guy in Greece. I'm telling you, he's eating the lower middle class guy in Greece is definitely eating probably better than an upper middle class guy in the U.S., maybe even in Germany, um, because we value different things in America. We love things, man. We love the big cars. We kind of like glorify wealth. We glorify, just having all these things, the boats and the cars and the swimming pools and, the bigger houses. And it's not that way here. I can't explain it to people, but please trust me, it's not that way. You'll have like, I have really rich dentist friends. They live in, 1,200 square foot home, that's it. I mean, but what he does value, let me tell you this, is, he'll go golfing all over the world. He travels a lot more. Why? Because he has time. So he values that much more than we do. But back to the food issue. Obviously, it's the chemicals and all that kind of stuff. It's the prices, and But for me, that's a value system that you can definitely add on. Meeting people, eating out, sitting together hours at a time, and walking along is part of being fit. You do not see that many obese people. Let me tell you, anybody that's been to Europe for a long time, they forget that. But the minute you go back to America, man, we got a lot of beer bellies out there, I mean, I'm not talking, beer bellies. I'm talking obese. You see a lot of people, and I mean a lot, that you just don't see that much here. And one of that is walking. Like, what do you mean walking? People walk everywhere, man. People will walk. Again, it's more densely populated. You'll walk to the bus station. You take the bus down to the inner city. The inner city is a pedestrian zone. That's basically the mall. So you walk from one side to the other, and there's something that the Greeks have, especially, so hopefully somebody will, back me up on this, but we have the Volta. Where are you going? German Spazieren. What are you doing? We're going walking. Like, that's what we're going to do. We're going to go for a walk. The Germans might do Spazieren. They're big on Spazieren in the forest. Through the town. They love the good nature walks. The Greeks aren't as big on nature walks, but they love walking with, and I mean walking, I mean like 2-3 hours, stopping at cafes, bars, going to a restaurant, walking back. They've been on the road, they did their 8,000. They don't need a step master, and this happens daily. And I remember my life in America, I got out of my car, had a driveway, went into my car, drove to work, got into my station, sat down, worked there, went back home, had a big dinner. But I don't move. We don't move in America. It's not necessary almost. So, we're trying to save time to find time to go to a fitness studio, which is kind of like pathetic, but I think I covered it basically. That was a long video. Those are the main reasons why I think life is better. Now, with a retirement point of view, maybe I'll make a second video. Let me get my thoughts together, because that was a long video in itself. But there's definitely differences. If you want me to do another one of the advantages of the U.S., I can. Like I said in the beginning, I did not live a bad life in the U.S., but my life is busy. I can't imagine myself going back to the U.S. at this point, especially with retirement the way it is. People tend to bitch upon Germany. Let me tell you, the Germans are some of the biggest complainers. That's why maybe somehow they achieve things in life, because they love perfection. They love bitching. Jammern heißt this. That's what it's called in German. There's a German saying that they admitted that wir jammern auf dem höchsten Niveau, which means basically we complain at the highest level. It's like, my Mercedes, I don't like the ABS. But regardless of that, being retired here, I can survive a lot easier than I can in the U.S. just looking at healthcare alone, because I talk to a lot of people my age. I can do another video on this. It's tough out there, guys. For you, I realize it. I see my brother, because they had to work till 67. Like a huge difference, just because of healthcare with their families and all that kind of stuff. And another point is that, in the U.S., a lot of us we think we have money. I see that again from my friends. That's just my personal view. Not everybody, obviously, but a lot. They'll have a lot of what I call value, and you see that in GDP. If anybody that studied political economics, values and consumption, and you'll have Americans that will say, they're, they're worth like, $1 million. I know a lot of them. Now, how much cash do they have? Like 30,000, 10,000. You're like, what? Yeah. Because you know what I mean. Their house is worth 750,000, but it's a house. It's not cash. You see what I'm saying? He might have another 40, 50,000 just in assets lying around between his boat, his swimming pool, but that's not cash. So those assets are secondary to the value and makes you look rich, but it's not cash. A lot of Europeans don't think that way. Basically, their retirement plans are, first of all, usually, it's tough, by the way. It's tough here. If you're making, half of what you were making before as a normal salary and you were, making well, you're still doing okay, but, your life has to have a different kind of, expenditures just to compensate. Same in the U.S., same here. That's why you have a, kind of like a safety nest. But just the healthcare issue for me is just, a real major issue that makes me stay here. Because if anything happens here, they have something what the Germans call, it's not that good in Greece, but they do have in Greece, but it's more private. But regardless, staying here, my world, Pflegeversicherung, which basically means if anything happens to me, it's almost like, I don't know what the word for it is. It's like an old folks home. If anything happens to me, I don't want to be away from my kids. I pay for an insurance that will take me, put me in depending on my, problems, in a home where, if I'm good enough, I can walk out, but they'll come and clean up and, wash up after me, all the way to if I'm invalid sitting in a bed, 24-hour care almost. That's taken care of. I mean, think about that as a whole because I'm getting to that age. And that's it, everybody. Having said that, miss all my friends in America. I hope to get there. I was going to come next year with a World Cup. This is going to be a political. This is the last point. I was going to go there with about maybe, 6 guys. They know who they are, some from Argentina and stuff. They're not really into going there right now. We're looking at games in Mexico and Canada. Obviously, I hope I won't have a problem. I will be in the U.S. It's not good seeing reports of, people being, from ICE agents in Danbury, Connecticut, that you're walking down the street and somebody comes up to you, who are you? Imagine now in my case, I've been living abroad. I just came back. I now have a Greek passport. I don't want to go through that. I'm being honest with you. It does cross my mind. Okay. Now imagine these guys who are, Argentinians, Mexicans, Tunisians, these are brown Arab, they have money, they got everything in life, kind of, but the propaganda, I don't know if it's propaganda, but it's just not looking good. I hope to make it next year for the World Cup anyway. Miss you guys. If you have any questions, please feel free to, ask.